Hello, everybody. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 308. Today, we are going to be talking about Joe Biden, Afghanistan, inflation, infrastructure. We'll see. We'll see what we can get to. I don't know. I always try to bite off more than I can chew with this podcast, but I hope we can get to the inflation topic. Joining me today, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm okay, all things considered. It's pretty depressing out there. So that's a great way to start the pod.
Yeah, perfectly in line with our intro music. That's absolutely right. Chris Talgo, senior editor at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
Like Jim, I'm a little disappointed right now to be an American, but we'll motor through this.
Okay, all right. Well, leave it up to me to try to bump up the enthusiasm a little bit here. I'll see what I could do. Last week, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its sixth assessment report on global warming. In a press release, they called the situation Code Red for humanity. But in our fast-paced, quick turnover news cycle, this is old news already. So despite the fact that many of the talking heads on CNN, MSNBC were sounding the alarm on the imminent apocalypse just 7 days ago, today, no one cares. So just move on. We dedicated the entirety of last episode to talking about it. If you didn't watch it, you should. We had Steve Malloy on. It was a really, really good episode. But yeah, so the news cycle has moved on to fresher topics. It's pretty astonishing how short people's attention spans on. But do you know who the real victim in all of this is? Al Gore. Yeah, you guessed it. Al Gore, just when you thought that he was going to be re-entering the public discourse again, Afghanistan implodes. So Al Gore is out there, he's probably the one that's most mad at Joe Biden. Jim, last week I mentioned how the assessment report, AR6, would have its moment in the sun before people's attention is diverted to the newest topic du jour. Are you surprised at just how quickly that happened?
Not really. Considering what's going on in Afghanistan, which is we'll get to a little later on this podcast, probably the worst foreign policy debacle in all of our lifetimes, and maybe it would definitely be competing in all of American history. But yeah, I saw a poll the other day that that people don't care about climate change. And this is actually consistent across the board and has been reflected in polling results going back decades that, despite all the attention the media and our culture gives to climate change and stopping climate change and changing all of our society in order to stop climate change and all of that and stop the temperature from rising, that the public kind of doesn't care. It always ranks very low on the policy priorities of voters. It's either last or next to last on a list of 20 that people don't vote and don't care about climate change. And, considering what's happening in Afghanistan right now, literally nobody is talking about it. It is not on the news at all. There will not be any big special pullout features on our network news shows or our cable news shows. And I saw a poll the other day that, not only did the American public not really paying attention to the IPCC report, but they actually don't even care about what Biden's policies are on climate and energy. They just they don't know much about it, and they don't really care to know much about it. But the danger here is that despite the fact that it's not in the news, that does not mean that the United Nations and the United States, through the Biden administration, is not going to continue to pursue economically ruinous and policies that will make us energy poor and will not have any effect on the climate. It was, I do, as you said, Donnie, I encourage our listeners to check out last week's episode so that they can get a great discussion on that topic with the fantastic Steve Malloy. But, it's may not be in the news, but it's going to make news whether people are paying attention or not by making us poorer and taking us into international agreements that reduce our sovereignty.
Well, okay, so off of what you just said there, I mean, like we talk about on this podcast how like the left or on like a domestic policy front or the global elites when we're talking about the Great Reset, like they have in their plans, clear as day to look at, like using climate change as justification to pursue all of these, progressive plans or radical societal changes. But like, if this isn't proof of the lack of staying power that like this topic has in like the public minds, like doesn't that just kind of undercut, like their plans to do some of this, or at least, extend the timeline of how long it would take for them to implement some of their plans using climate change as justification? What do you think?
Well, I mean, we're going to talk about it. We talked about a couple times on this podcast recently, the infrastructure bill. I don't know, what is it, $5 trillion, all told, 2 infrastructure bills, about $5 trillion. And a lot of the Green New Deal agenda is shoved in there. And they're going to pass it by a process they call reconciliation, which means that it won't be able to be filibustered. And so, again, kind of behind the back of the American people, when people are not paying attention, a lot of stuff like mandating that cars get 50 miles a gallon, mileage as an average for the fleet, that kind of stuff that is not achievable in current technology, to be honest. Things like mandating that electric cars are all that the entire federal fleet, for instance, has to convert to electric vehicles by, I think, 2030. So this stuff is actually going to happen. It's going to be put into place as policy. I mean, I don't think it's actually going to happen because I don't think it's practical and technologically we can't do it. But the left's still pushing its agenda through, and we're going to see it. We're going to see it happening, and people are going to wonder, where the hell did this come from? Well, I mean, it happened with it happened with climate.
I mean, it's very curious to me, and I'm not sure. I mean, at the onset of all of this pandemic stuff, right? You said it, Jim. You thought people would put up with this for like a month. Obviously, the general public took this stuff seriously enough to put up with all this pandemic, quarantine, restrictions, all this stuff for 16 months now. And it's just like, I don't see that same type of, effect on the population coming from climate change. Like, it just doesn't seem like anyone really wants to take this seriously. Chris, you kind of focus on just like I don't know, what's in the news, the daily news cycle, probably more than either Jim or I. Does this kind of short lifespan of climate change like surprise you at all?
No, I think, Jim made a great point that, when you look at plenty of polls, climate change, it ranks near the bottom in terms of like concerns. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that they've been selling this catastrophe for so many decades now. I think a lot of people, they just kind of see through it. They kind of, roll their eyes. Okay, another, report saying that the world's going to end in 12 years. And it just doesn't resonate with the American people.
Yeah. Well, I saw this one thing. This Jim, actually, you sent this to me like just before the show. I saw it this morning. An Axios article, Biden's climate communications challenge. And it says that the UN IPCC report, released on Monday, was splashed across newspapers' front pages and at the top most mainstream news websites, and receives significant TV coverage on cable and network broadcasts. But the report, the panel's most comprehensive look at how humans are altering the planet's climate in sweeping ways, failed to register, let alone resonate with swing voters, according to an unscientific sampling from 2 focus groups conducted Tuesday evening. So it goes through and talks about in this article that basically, despite all of the dire warnings, your average swing voter, or let alone the people on the right, just don't seem to care that much. And one of the examples, and this is totally anecdotal, it says, Greg L., 57, of Pennsylvania, said that the headline he saw on CNN was so alarming, it discouraged him from reading the story. And I actually think that this is an extremely important point. And it's actually an important point that like people on our side can take to heart. I think too often when a problem is described in such dire ways, it doesn't like breed people like rising to the occasion. I think it breeds apathy. I think people are like, well, throw my hands up. I guess we're all going to die from a climate change apocalypse. Nothing I can do. Move on. It's like, I don't know. What do you think about that, Jim?
Well, I think that's actually a very encouraging sign. As you said, they've been telling us that the Earth is doomed for decades now, and I don't know how they keep pushing the deadline of when we can't delay anymore. We must completely transform our society. We must get out of our SUVs, which we must all get on public transportation. We must no longer fly airplanes. We have to reduce our standard of living because we have to save the planet, and if we don't, the planet will burn. And the environment will be destroyed, and it won't be very inhabitable for humans. And, the seas will rise and cities will be flooded and there'll be climate refugees everywhere. It is a relentless relentless litany of disaster and doom, and it's been going on for decades. And the good news here, according to that focus group, is that there is a point of diminishing returns on those sorts of doom and gloom predictions. People are not going to sit there and listen to that and take action. I mean, it's what's funny is that they haven't changed their tactics for 20, 30, 40 years. It's always a disaster. We have to act now. And so what's actually interesting, and it's reflected in this story from Axios, is that the media coverage has basically taken that gloom and doom one more step. And some of the coverage even said, it's actually too late. It's too late now. We blew it. It's too late. We're all going to, the environment's going to be destroyed. It's too late, but we should still do something anyway, just to make sure that it's not as bad as it could be.
Right. We're all going to die, but at least it won't be quite as painful.
Right. And so, I mean, people are not idiots. They hear these things and it's like, they know they're being lied to be honest with you. And that's one of the reasons why, again, voters don't consider climate change a key factor in their voting decisions, because I think they just know that it's all BS, that this is an avenue for controlling our economy and controlling people. Right. And they just and they're tuning out.
Right.
Donnie, one just quick thing. I also think this shows how out of touch, Washington, D.C. Politicians are. This might be a big deal to them, but like Jim said, and I mean, I go around my community asking people what they care about. Climate change almost never comes up.
Right.
It's kitchen table issues. It's things that actually impact their life. Climate change is an abstract, concept that doesn't really hit home with them. But for politicians, it's their pet project, and they're going to push it as far as they can.
Well, it's like federal spending, right? That used to be a really, really big deal. In the 1990s, the Republican Revolution led by Newt Gingrich, one of the linchpins of that created their political popularity was the idea that the deficit and the debt was too big. We had to get spending under control. It was probably the number one topic, of the presidential election, 1992. Ross Perot bringing out his charts showing how the deficit that was growing and the national debt is gonna sink us and all of that stuff. That was a big deal 20, 30 years ago. Nobody cares about it now. We're passing $1 trillion stimulus bills. We're passing multi-trillion dollar COVID relief packages. We're paying people to not work, extended unemployment, seemingly forever. And nobody cares. Nobody talks about it anymore. Nobody looks at the debt as some kind of, some kind of economic crusher, can crusher anymore, because it just doesn't resonate. So climate change has reached that point too. It just doesn't resonate with people anymore. They just tune out.
But I wonder if that, the debt crisis thing. Well, I think there's two things that might be actually very similar. I don't know. Maybe I'm going out of bounds here by making this comparison, but maybe it is very similar to like the climate change thing, right? Because like one, it's like that alarm is being sounded since as far as I can remember, right? What am I talking about? The debt crisis or climate change? Pick your choice, because it's both of them. And two, it's just like it seems so impossible to like overcome that I think people just tune out, And the other thing that came to mind, I was thinking about this before you said anything about that, is like the whole voter, like people thinking that their votes don't count. It's like, is that driving people to like make changes? Yeah, here and there and stuff. But I feel like anecdotally, I hear more people just be like why would I vote next time? Like my vote doesn't matter, So it's like these huge crises when it's like you're painting them as these you can't overcome these problems type of thing. People just become apathetic. I'm not going to vote. My vote doesn't matter.
Right.
So it's just like, I think it's like we can learn a lesson about this of like, how do we actually talk about these issues? But I don't know. That's probably a larger discussion.
Treat the American people like adults, not children.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. So when the report came out, considering this topic is like bread and butter for the Heartland Institute, I figured we'd dedicate multiple episodes to this. One, going through the report, two, responding to like the media stuff that they're trying to, the media narratives that they're trying to, come up with, maybe discussing real solutions. I thought that this report would give us podcast fodder for like 3 weeks. And like I said, it's completely dropped. It's completely dropped out of the news, so, I feel like we should move on to, and of course, however, that doesn't mean the Heartland Institute as a whole is dropping this as a topic. We have released a lot of content regarding the IPCC report. Heartland's President James Taylor joined a couple of our energy and environment policy experts to directly respond to the report. This happened last week, I think right after our show. I think it happened on Friday. The video is in the show notes, or you can go to our YouTube channel and find it. It's pretty easy to find. Our government relations team is conducting a webinar on the same basic premise, I think later today, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
We have a beautifully laid out FAQ sheet that should be posted on our website probably sometime today as well. And surely there are numerous articles that you can find on heartlanddailynews.com or heartland.org that cover all of this stuff. So we have plenty of content coming out dismissing all these apocalyptic claims or responding to all these apocalyptic claims from the UN IPCC report. And of course, we have our upcoming 14th International Conference on Climate Change, which will be taking place at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas from October 15th to the 17th. Tickets are available now. Go to climateconference.heartland.org to get tickets, or you can click on the little featured image on the front page of heartland.org. So, like I said, Heartland Institute is still paying close attention to this report and refuting it in every way possible, but it seems like we're the only ones. we're the only ones talking about this. Everyone else in the world has their eyes on Afghanistan. And of course, I'm not blaming them, of course, but it's just kind of, the world's supposedly on fire. Afghanistan's literally on fire. So we're going to pay attention to that. I get it. So generally speaking, we don't talk about foreign policy much at the Heartland Institute. We're primarily focused on domestic policy issues that pertain to energy, environment, healthcare, education, budget and tax issues, etc. But as Jim said during our pre-show discussion, we have to talk about Afghanistan. So we will, but I will put this little disclaimer out there. None of what we talk about, none of what Chris says or Jim says or I say directly reflects the viewpoints of the organization as a whole. That is a general rule of thumb throughout all of the episodes of this podcast, but I feel like I should probably point that out before we talk about Afghanistan here. So I don't suspect anyone listening to this podcast is unaware of the horrors that are unfolding in Afghanistan. Fewer people are aware of how we got to this point, I suspect. So anyone want to give us a brief synopsis of how we got to this point? Perhaps you, Jim?
Well, I mean,
maybe save some editorializing a little bit.
Yeah, I'll save some editorializing. But look, the gosh, it's almost even hard where to stop. Let me just say this to kind of open the conversation about this thing. Is like the war in Afghanistan went on for 20 years. It was obviously trying to nation build in Afghanistan was an enormous mistake and a very expensive mistake as far as American lives and treasure. And, it should have been, now in hindsight, it's very easy to say, we should have just smashed the Taliban, kept looking for Osama bin Laden, conducted a lot of this stuff via drones, and never actually tried to occupy the country. Just keep them down, keep their heads down, and see how that works out. But no, George W. Bush decided to embark in a nation-building exercise in Afghanistan, and the United States has learned, like almost every other civilization for thousands of years, that Afghanistan is not a governable place. And as they say, the graveyards, the graveyards of empires are all in Afghanistan. But so Trump actually was the president who said we need to get out of there. This war is not productive anymore. We've accomplished what we can accomplish, and we need to go. And I think every libertarian and most Americans would agree with that. But what has happened is that the Biden administration, actually the Trump administration, had a plan, had a very detailed contingency plan to handle something like evacuating a war zone like Afghanistan and getting Americans out of harm's way. And the Biden administration, just like the left has done, for the last 5 years, if Trump is for it, it must be wrong. It must be bad. We have to throw it away and start over again. Well, the Biden administration started over again with no plan. And so, here we have an instance where Biden has a decades-long record of being 180 degrees wrong when it comes to a major foreign policy issue. And his record, tragically, is still unbroken. You know, you think about the one of the things that really grates me, and I think a lot of Americans, is that the Biden administration, which is a bunch of Obama holdovers for the most part, their arrogance, their smugness, the idea that they have all the answers and they've thought this through, and get out of the way, you dumb Trump guy. We're going to fix this. We're going to do this the right way. And the entire team is actually indicative, or a great example of what Joe Biden actually is. His actual talent is in inverse proportion to his perception of his talent. He is not a bright man. These people that he's put in power are not bright people. They have completely botched this thing, and it's almost unbearable to watch these people who think they have all the answers, these globalists, and then they actually had no plan, and they did everything backwards. I mean, it is really hard to imagine this being handled any worse. And one of my mottos is things can always get worse, and things will probably get worse. And so today is probably the best conditions on the ground in Afghanistan that we will see. And that's really scary.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some takeaways from kind of the media coverage of all of this that I want to get into. But before I do, Chris, do you have any upfront things you want to talk about with Afghanistan?
Yeah, Jim raised many great points. I agree with, the vast majority of everything he just said. However, I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle. I was in college, a freshman at University of Tennessee when September 11th happened. I remember the immediate aftermath, and we went into Afghanistan. We obliterated Al Qaeda. We had Osama bin Laden on the run. However, we pivoted into, like Jim said, nation building and this 20-year, fruitless endeavor. But I put a lot of that on the military industrial complex. We spent $1 trillion there. Eisenhower warned us about this, before he left office, that you've got these giant military contractors, the Pentagon, all these people who go in there and say, we need to do this, this, and that. We need all this money. And, we saw for 2 decades, there was so much corruption, so much money wasted, the $10,000 hammers, the $20,000 toilets. It doesn't really surprise me that it got to that, but I was excited to some degree that, when, the Trump administration took office, they were going to put an end to that. The America First agenda was saying, let's not put money there. Let's put money here, and let's protect Americans, and let's stop being the world police. Right. And I mean, I know that that's like a small element of what's going on right now. But I also think that, like Jim said, that, President Biden is just weak. He was wrong, about so many foreign policy decisions. He was against the raid on Osama bin Laden. I mean, that to me alone just makes him ineligible to, be the commander in chief. So we've just seen this thing just get completely, mishandled. The buck stops with President Biden. He messed this up. I agree that a lot of it was done in spite of, Donald Trump. But I also think that the Taliban and a lot of the fighters, not only in Afghanistan, but in that region, just view the Biden administration as weak. They knew if they would have done this with Trump on the watch, that there would have been hell to pay. So right. It doesn't surprise me at all. It's so sad. It's so disappointing. I had friends who actually went and fought in Afghanistan, and talking to them, just over the past couple of weeks, it's bewildering.
Yeah, no doubt. So Biden came out and did his little speech on Monday, and I really thought that he was going to kind of walk back all of this and talk about how we need to expand our presence in there for the foreseeable future. But to his credit, he actually, said, no, we're gonna stay out of this, or, continue to move out. And we'll see if he kind of doubles back on that as this situation continues to get worse in Afghanistan, but I don't know. But a couple of things that he said during that kind of annoyed me. Yeah, the buck stops here. He was trying to say that he was basically taking credit for all the decisions that were being made in there, while simultaneously blaming pretty much everyone that could be blamed, for all of this. But the thing that got me most annoyed was he was saying that he's the 4th president to have to deal with this, and he doesn't want to pass it on to a 5th president. And
what a hero.
Yeah, well, it's And he's talking about how like this was always like a bad idea to do the nation building. It's like, weren't you vice president for like 8 years during the Obama administration who got elected on an anti-war platform?
Who was put in charge of Afghan policy, mind you.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like, what happened then? What happened during those 8 years? Like, so there was just so much just like hypocritical stuff that I saw in that his Monday little speech that he gave. But to me, the biggest surprise is the lack of cover being supplied by the mainstream media for Biden. I thought they would be like out in full force to carry water for him and to talk about all the brave things that he's doing and trying to blame those darn Republicans for making this situation bad. And I really thought that it was going in that direction when Biden really started, like before, the stuff really started getting bad, where he was almost trying to lay the blame on Trump. But I don't know, like there's been a lot of things that have been coming out that like even the left, the mainstream media is like kind of tearing into Biden, which is surprising me. So I've got a bunch of this stuff in the show notes, but the Washington Post article, Biden blames others for swift collapse of Afghanistan, defends his decision to withdraw troops. Washington Post, and that headline makes it seem like Biden is, trying to escape blame, The Atlantic, Biden's betrayal of Afghanistan will live in infamy. Like, that's a pretty harsh headline for our, sitting Democratic president, right? And in that, it says the Biden administration failed to heed warnings on Afghanistan, failed to act with urgency, and its failure has left tens of thousands of Afghans to a terrible fate. This betrayal will live in infamy. The burden of shame falls on President Joe Biden. Like, that's a very harsh statement from The Atlantic, that's generally a very lefty magazine. Don Lemon, I think on Monday, tore into Biden. There's an article that I have in here that has one of the clips of it, but he says the buck stops here. He says the buck stops with him taking responsibility. That's important, except you can't really say the buck stops with me if you don't really take the blame. President Biden pointed the finger at Afghans themselves. He said didn't want to leave earlier. And the Afghan government, he said, wanted to avoid a crisis of confidence, and Afghan political leaders who fled the country, and the Afghan military. So, like, when Don Lemon, who's like as lefty as they come, is tearing into you, and you're on the left, I don't know, man. The winds seem to be blowing against you pretty hard. I've got a bunch of stuff in here. CNN article, Democrats grapple with Afghanistan fallout after Biden administration ignored their previous warnings. So in this, there are several fairly high-level Democrats that are like quoted talking about how, these warnings about Afghanistan seemingly fell on deaf ears. There's one guy who I think was the Senate Intelligence Chairman, Mark Warner, calling for an investigation into how the administration was so unprepared for this. There's another article, Reuters, Biden approval drops to lowest in 7 months after the Taliban takeover. So it's just like, I don't know, Jim, you tell me. You were in the media. You were one of these guys. So like, is something happening here? Is Joe Biden like the fall guy? What do you think?
Even our corrupt legacy corporate media can't ignore what is going to go down in history as maybe the worst debacle, foreign policy and preventable debacle in American history. You can't deny, you can't just sit there and pretend that, Afghans so desperate to get out and escape the Taliban that they clung to the outside of a transport plane and fell to their deaths when the plane reached its altitude. You can't wish away the fact that on that flight, one of the Afghans got caught in the gears of the landing gears in that airplane and was crushed to death, and his body was flapping outside the window in the wind for people to see. You can't unsee that stuff. You can't pretend that didn't happen and that is not a terrible, terrible thing. You cannot pretend, even our leftist corrupt corporate media cannot pretend that we literally have at least 10,000, maybe as many as 30,000 Americans, U.S. citizens trapped in Afghanistan right now. You can't ignore the fact that Biden did this completely backwards. We had an airbase, a secure airbase, for which we could have done lots of evacuations, and not do it at the Kabul airport, which has one runway and is surrounded by the Taliban. You can't ignore, even as a reporter on the left, you cannot ignore the fact that there was a staffer for a United States senator who said that he had talked to people in Afghanistan, Americans trapped in Afghanistan, and they just wanted to know, they were hunkered down, they were hiding, and they just wanted to know if any advice on when it might be the best time to make a run for it, to make a run for the airport. We had U.S. troops right now in Afghanistan, or at least yesterday in Afghanistan, were under orders not to go out into the streets and try to find Americans and get them to safety. The Brits, who were also at that airport, wanted to go out and get their guys. And there was a conflict between our two countries and our militaries over the fact that the Brits wanted to go out and rescue innocent Westerners, Americans and Brits alike, and the United States didn't want them to go. That's what I mean. This just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. We closed down and evacuated our air base, our military assets right there, before we evacuated a single American civilian from that country, before we evacuated a single Afghan ally who helped us in that 20-year war. Joe Biden and these elites, these people that think they know everything, who run things in this country, our elite establishment in this country, have completely failed. And they have made every wrong decision. And these are not even, I wouldn't think, difficult decisions. How can you close our air base and not before you get the civilians out? That's insane. And that was the decision that Joe Biden made. He could have made another decision. I don't think Trump would have closed our air bases and just left civilians to fend for themselves in a country that has been now completely taken over by 7th century barbarians who are torturing, beating, killing, and soon to be beheading on television Westerners who are trapped there because this president and the people around him are so incompetent that it's going to be death on scales that we can hardly imagine. It's going to get worse. We do not have thousands of Americans lined up somewhere in a warehouse with Taliban soldiers holding guns, holding them hostage. The Iranian hostage crisis for Jimmy Carter's administration, they were held for 444 days. I believe it was maybe a few dozen. I didn't think to look it up, but it wasn't more than 100. We have potentially thousands of American citizens who depended on their government to protect them, who believed Joe Biden and our experts at the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff when they said publicly several times, you guys got plenty of time. Don't sweat it. There's no way the Taliban are going to be able to take over the country. Maybe in 3 months, maybe by the end of the year, but don't worry about it. They took over the country in a weekend. They took control of Kabul on a single day, and that is because the Afghan army basically gave up. They just there wasn't any fighting in the streets. They just said, "Hey, well, forget it. Hey, here's some nice American military equipment, by the way. You guys can have that. Will you let me go home? Can I go home now? Great." And so that's exactly what happened. We trained these guys for 20 years, and this is what happens. And the idea, and Biden said this on Monday. He says we were clear-eyed about the risks and we planned for every contingency. He did not plan for every contingency. He certainly did not plan for this contingency.
Right.
Every decision that they made about this was completely backwards and disastrous, and it is going to get worse. This is what happens. This is an utter failure of our establishment institutions in this country, all the way up and down the line. And, that's actually a lesson for other policies or other things in the United States going on today, from COVID to climate change to taxes to everything else. Our establishment institutions in this country are utter failures. And we're seeing this, and we're seeing it in a very deadly way right now.
Chris, you've talked to me before about how you watch like some Fox News stuff, but you also watch, the CNN and the MSNBC stuff as well. Have you checked in on how their coverage of all of this is? Is it as dire or as terrible for Biden as I'm suggesting it is with all of these things that I quoted earlier?
Yeah, I think that it's fair to say that CNN, MSNBC, and even some of the networks are somewhat fairly reporting this. But can I just get away from the political angle for a minute and just kind of hyper focus on the Biden withdrawal plan? And I think it was on July 7th, Joe Biden said that the Taliban has 75,000 fighters. The Afghanistan military has 300,000. There is literally no way that they can take over this country. He said, comparing this to the North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese is just completely, not relevant. But I find it impossible to believe that given the NSA, given our drone flights over the area, given all the intelligence that we have, that this was just a giant surprise. We knew that this was happening. We knew it was happening real time. We know exactly what's happening. For some reason, I don't know the answer to this, our president and those in charge have decided that this is what they want to do. I do not know why, but that is the conclusion that I've come to. So, it's just so disappointing because we have the capability, we have the power to go and stop the Taliban in 5 minutes. Yet we're just not doing it. We're letting this take place. And like Jim said, you now have tens of thousands of Americans behind enemy lines. However, the Biden administration has made it a priority to actually evacuate Afghanis and their families. And this just blew my mind. On one of the C-30 transport planes that left the airport yesterday, it was 70% full of Afghanistan, interpreters and people who I totally think should be rescued. But it was only 30% filled with American citizens. So where are our priorities? This has been so bumbled in so many ways, yet I refuse to believe that this is just happening and they're just going, well, I didn't see this one coming. Our intelligence agencies have every single, Taliban commander and every single, Taliban force under watch. They know what's happening. This is happening in real time, and we know it, yet they're letting it happen.
The Taliban now has more money and controls more land than they did before 9/11. And they have billions of dollars worth of United States military equipment in their possession, which is extremely valuable too. And a lot of technology. They have drones. They have Black Hawk helicopters. For crying out loud, this is a debacle that has no equal in American history.
Before this, the Taliban had no air force. Now they have, I think it was the 34th largest air force in the world, just because they've taken over the planes and Black Hawks and other aircraft that we left there. So we have given them, the capabilities to become, so much more dangerous.
We talk about how like you shouldn't judge policy based on their intentions, right? You have to judge it based on their outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
The outcome of this policy is terrible. Oh my gosh!
Oh, it's unimaginably terrible.
The intentions and the outcomes have been terrible.
Look, getting out of Afghanistan was never going to be easy. I think that's the one thing all Americans would be clear-eyed about. That eventually, at some point, and this is where Biden at least told the truth, but his timeline was way off, was the idea that the Taliban would probably eventually take over the country again. It was a chance we were taking that the Afghan government and its military would be able to fight them off and control it and be if not an ally, at least not, an Islamist caliphate in Afghanistan. But it didn't work out that way. But withdrawing was always going to be difficult, and the aftermath was always going to be bloody and messy. But it did not have to be bloody and messy with Americans, with American citizens as part of the blood, civilians on the ground. Can you imagine being a soldier who was evacuated and sent home from Afghanistan last month, like when they closed Bagram Air Base? Can you imagine being that soldier, like a special ops guy, who is now sitting back home in the United States, safe? He's not going to be attacked by the Taliban, knowing that if you were still in country, you would be able to help those Americans who were trapped behind enemy lines, be able to help those Americans who are basically going to be human shields now and hostages going forward. There are so many more bad things that are going to happen because of the way this was handled. And at the very least, you keep the military in there to protect American citizens until you evacuate all of them out of the country, and then you fly out and you guys have at it, have your country to do this, to put so many Americans civilians in harm's way and leave them there. That's unconscionable It's unconscionable. This debacle is going to get worse. We're going to see some really, really bad things on TV in the coming weeks and months. It's horrifying.
Well, Jim, you said when I kind of brought up this whole like the media seems to be taking it to Biden thing, you said like, well, it's just so bad that they can't ignore it, which of course, they got to talk about it. But I figured that the spin cycle would be a little bit stronger, like I said, the groundwork was kind of laid to try to lay a lot of this on Trump, to blame him on doing some of this, whatever. I figured that they would just double down on that. So are you not surprised that Biden is taking such political hits for this?
I'm pleasantly surprised, to be honest with you. But I think the media is having a hard time finding anybody who will go on camera and defending Biden and his decisions in this whole thing. The first clip I saw was early on. It was earlier this week. And it was a clip of right after the Monday address from Joe Biden, who came out, gave it, turned around and hightailed it off camera before he got, and didn't answer any questions. But right after the speech, Brian Williams on MSNBC, and by the way, the movie Anchorman, that's Brian Williams. Brian Williams is a moron, and he's so full of himself. And so he comes on, and he's like, with that voice of his, like, a profound speech by the American president and all this stuff. And then he asked the guy for his reaction to it. And he said flat out to Brian Williams, "What speech did you guys watch? Are you kidding me? This is a debacle. This is crazy." And he just went on, and Brian Williams just let him go. He went on for like 2 minutes straight on what a disaster this whole thing is. And so I think that was kind of the hint that this was not going to be the usual media that Joe Biden is used to, asking him what flavor of ice cream he has today. That there are some serious things going on in this world, and he is screwing it up. Well, and I really do think that the media, not only do they have, I wouldn't call it integrity, but you can't ignore this much horrible reality. And I don't even think Rachel Maddow will be able to find someone to come on camera and get away with saying this is all Trump's fault and trying to defend Joe Biden. Right. It's indefensible, even for a hard leftist. But Biden's own family couldn't defend this. I mean, that's how bad this is. And that's why you're seeing the media coverage the way it is. Well, there's no other way to cover it.
I think Hunter Biden was drafting out a defense on one of his laptops, but then he got lost.
Well, but Donnie, also keep in mind that while this was happening, where was Joe Biden? He was at Camp David on vacation. He took a very brief respite from his vacation, came back, gave a speech that was, written for him. He didn't take any questions. So he's, by not addressing this and by not, taking ownership and by not, grabbing this thing by the horns, he's allowing, I think it's like it forces the media to talk about it and say, why is he not doing anything? What is going on? So part of it's also the fact that he's just, so absent, in all of this that they can't help but place some of the blame, but also just, keep this thing, at the front and center of all the newscasts. Because like Jim said, when you've got pictures of people falling out of transport airplanes, you can't ignore that. The media, they can't. It's going to get eyeballs. They want viewers. People watch that and just say, wow, I can't believe this is happening. And I think they can't not implicate, Joe Biden to some degree for, what's going on right now. He's responsible. He's the commander in chief. It's happening on his watch.
Yeah, it's also interesting to see how, they're, what is it, like crisis mode at the White House? And not crisis because there's a crisis going on, crisis because he's taking political hits, So it's interesting to see like what they're doing in their little crisis mode. And like he's issued like a bunch of tweets about, the COVID and the Delta variant. And I think he took a jab at like the governor of like Ron DeSantis, right? The governor of Florida, about like him handling this. It's just like, no, let's not talk about Afghanistan anymore. Remember that Delta variant? Yeah, let's talk about that. So let's talk about that some more.
Yesterday, Joe Biden had a press conference in which he exclusively talked about the Delta variant and lobbed attacks on the governor of Florida. However, he refused to answer one single question about what's going on in Afghanistan. Now, just for a second, can you imagine Donald Trump doing something similar to that?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, the media would just completely lambaste him. So I think the way that the media is treating Joe Biden, it's still sympathetic. I mean, they're still trying to go out of their way to say, well, it's not really all his fault. George W. Bush, got us in this war, and Donald Trump did a terrible job in negotiating with the Taliban. But they can't ignore the fact that this is happening on his watch.
Before we run off to, and one of our listeners would like us to get to the infrastructure bill, and I would like to do that as well. But I just want to reiterate, to kind of put a bow on this, that this is an utter failure of our establishment institutions in this country. That, from the military brass, who are more concerned about so-called domestic terrorists at the Capitol, and about so-called white rage, and transgenders in the military, and all. They're more concerned about that, obviously, than they were about what could go wrong in Afghanistan in a drawdown that has been in planning for more than a year. But they're focused on supposedly domestic terrorists on January 6th. These are the same institutional elites who have completely failed us when it comes to managing the COVID pandemic. That they have policies that don't work, but they only work actually for suppressing our freedom. And Dr. Fauci contradicting himself by the hour as we're going along. These are the establishment institutions in this country that aim to rule us, that think they have some kind of birthright to rule us. They went to the right schools. You didn't. Shut up and obey. Why won't you obey? You must obey. So these are the same people that are responsible for the worst debacle in foreign policy in American history are actually in charge of a lot of other stuff in this country. And that should make everybody quite worried.
Yeah.
That's a great point. And I'm still shocked that we aren't hearing calls for resignation from General Austin, from Mark Milley. These guys are literally putting Americans in danger this very second, and they're just going about their business like everything's fine. It's so shocking.
There'd be impeachment stuff on Trump rolling already, and there's no doubt about that. But to do hypocrisy things, because we would spend all day on that.
Yeah.
Andy, what do you got? You got some video? Joe Biden, what is this?
I'm not going to walk away on this.
Why are you so confident he'll change his behavior, Mr. President?
Yeah, I'm not confident in changing behavior. What do you do over there? So when did I say I was confident?
When did I say I was confident? He's not confident about anything, apparently. So while the Biden administration is crashing Afghanistan into the ground, they're also working hard to drive the dollar into the ground as well. So Chris, you've been working on this topic of inflation for a bit now, infrastructure inflation. They're actually fairly tied together. I've got a number of articles from several publications authored by you, one on the Washington Examiner, one on Town Hall, one from the Washington Times, one from The Hill, all talking about inflation and these infrastructure bills. One of your latest ones from the Washington Examiner, July inflation report is bad news for consumers again. You start off saying that since President Joe Biden entered the Oval Office, inflation in America has become a persistent problem. In fact, inflation has steadily risen from 1.7% in January to 5.4% in both June and July. Per the Bureau of Labor Statistics, quote, the all items index rose 5.4% for the 12 months ending in July, the same increase as the period ending in June. The index for all items less food and energy rose 4.3% over the past 12 months. While the energy index rose 23.8%, 23.8%, holy schnoly. The food index increased 3.4% for the 12 months ending in July compared to the 2.4% rise for the period ending in June. That all means that everything that you're going to the grocery store, when you go to the gas station, everything that you buy is going up in prices. So, I mean, Chris, I was told by our wannabe central planners that inflation was going to be transitory as we emerge from the pandemic. Is that not the case?
That is not the case at all. But, like we were talking about at the outside of the podcast today, this matters to American people. There are so many polls out that this is at the top of the mind, because every single person, when they go to fill up their gas tank, when they go to pay their heating bill, when they go to the grocery store, when they go anywhere, they're paying so much more money. And it's very simple why this is occurring. When you print more money, when you borrow more money, And when the government just doles out trillions and trillions like they have for COVID-19 and now for Biden's, Build Back Better agenda, the value of every existing dollar goes down. Prices rise. This is so simple. This is supply and demand. This is Econ 101. Now they're going to tell you, oh, modern monetary theory makes inflation a moot point, but that is not true. It is just shocking that they are trying to sugarcoat what's going on right now, because the American people see it, they know it, it's obvious.
Jim, did you want to jump in? I thought you saw your.
Thought you saw me start to get a little excited over here.
A little bit, yeah.
Well, I want to tie back to. Let's just say this: that leftists in general do not live in the real world. They live in a fantasy world. They believe that they can just do things that sound good or feel good, and that it will have no negative effects on the real world, on reality. But reality has a way of smacking you right in the face. Especially when you're arrogant and you're a leftist and you just plow ahead with what you with your leftist agenda. There's one thing that the left has always been, and that is economically ignorant. They don't understand how economics works. They say that they could just print trillions and trillions and trillions of more money and throw it into the economy. But yeah, inflation, that's not real. That won't happen. Yeah, inflation is real. Inflation happens. It's an economic law that if you keep injecting money into an economic system, you're going to cause inflation to skyrocket, and often it kind of accelerates on itself and goes up even higher. I mean, I hope we don't get to the point. Yeah, that's snowballing effect. I hope we don't. I hope we don't have to bring barrels full of cash to the grocery store to get a loaf of bread. But it happened in Zimbabwe. It happened in Weimar Germany 100 years ago. And economic laws will not be mocked, just as the laws of war and the rules of war will not be mocked either. These are the same elites that think they have everything figured out economically, that as they do foreign policy wise. And I'm trying to actually I was trying to think about this while Chris was speaking. I'm trying to think of a single policy that the Biden administration has implemented in just it's now 8 months into his presidency. I'm trying to think of a single policy that has actually had any benefit to the American people. And not just, and because I think every policy he's instituted has been to the detriment has harmed the American people. Can anyone think of one? Is there one thing that Biden has done as president that has made life better for, a regular working American, or for our COVID response, or for, the environment, or for our energy policy? Is there a single thing that he has done that has been to the benefit of the American people? I'm racking my brain. I can't think of one.
No, but this also is so emblematic of the left and living in their bubble. Joe Biden doesn't go to the grocery store. He doesn't know how much a gallon of milk costs. He doesn't know how much a carton of eggs costs. It's so ironic that they push these policies that are intended to help the poor, or so they say, yet stuff like inflation has a extremely detrimental effect on the poor. It disproportionately hurts the poor.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt the, John Kerrys of the world. It doesn't hurt Hunter Biden, but it hurts the poor. Those are the people that the Democratic Party, that they say, we're here to help. It's the exact opposite. During the Donald Trump administration, in which he cut taxes, in which he, cut regulations, wages went up. Wages went up across the board. Unemployment went way down, especially for minority populations. Go look at all those economic benchmarks now. They are horrible. So it's so disappointing that, that they push these policies, like Jim said, that actually harm the American people, and yet there's no consequence. Where's the accountability?
Well, yeah, so you've got an article in The Hill, Biden misunderstands basic economics, which you quote the president saying, "My Build Back Better plan will be a force for achieving lower prices for Americans looking ahead. It's another reason why these investments are so important." And I've also heard him say in like a little speech on town hall, or like in a town hall setting, that, and I'm like paraphrasing, he said, "If my plans are passed, it would actually reduce inflation. And I'm not sure if he meant to say that 3 times or if that's just like a symptom of his brains turning into mush. But yeah, it's just like, how could he have such a misunderstanding of these like basic things of economics? And on top of all the economic stimulus and the rescue bills, the administration is continuing to push for these infrastructure bills, right? And what's the latest on those bills, by the way?
Well, just one quick thing, and Jim, if you want to jump in, please go ahead. But I remember when Barack Obama was elected and he passed his stimulus program. It was 800 and something $billion, and back then that was like, oh my God, it's almost $1 trillion. But what did we learn from that? We learned that all those jobs were not, quote, shovel ready, which Obama just like laughed about years later. So this idea that infrastructure creates instant jobs is farcical, especially now with the federal government and the amount of bureaucracy and the amount of time it takes to like put like a sign in in a mall. Can you imagine how long it's going to take to actually get these projects actually going?
Oh, sure.
It's just mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling that they, get away with this, that they just push this, this stuff. And, hopefully the American people wake up. Hopefully in 2022, there's a Tea Party on steroids against this, because if we keep going at this rate, we're going to be in dire economic jeopardy.
Well, one thing before you jump in, Jim, you mentioned the $900 billion stimulus plan under Obama. That should be a perfect illustration of just how far we've gone, where that seems like we got a discount on something, right? that seems like we're using some half off coupon by today's standards. And Stephanie Kelton, who I always talk about, she's the face of the modern monetary theory. She wrote the book The Deficit Myth, which I unfortunately read from cover to cover. She in that book says that Obama, with his plan, that $900 billion plan, was essentially, this is almost a direct quote, is essentially a fiscal conservative. So that's the mindset of the people that are pushing this modern monetary theory stuff, and this idea of endless government spending won't necessarily reflect in inflation. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, hey, I remember 2009. Back then, hey, $900 billion was real money back then. That's nothing these days. You spend another we spent $900 billion, I think, in 2 months in COVID relief. So that's nothing. But have you guys ever, the whole thing about this infrastructure bill, right, is it would be one thing if we actually got improved infrastructure out of the back end of something like that. But as you mentioned, as Barack Obama himself said, it looks like those shovel-ready jobs weren't as shovel-ready as we thought. And it's actually, the United States used to be a really good-looking country in a lot of ways in our infrastructure. We used to build things in this country. We built skyscrapers. We have beautiful buildings like the Chrysler Building in New York, or the Sears Tower here in Chicago. We used to build things like the Hoover Dam. We used to do things like the Tennessee Valley Authority and bring electricity to rural areas in the South. We don't do that stuff anymore. We're going to spend trillions of dollars on so-called infrastructure, and our bridges and roads are still going to be garbage. Right. It's actually kind of depressing. If you look at the cities in the Arab world, the free Arab world, or the non-Islamist state Arab world, like Doha and Abu Dhabi in United Arab Emirates, look at those buildings that they've built. Look at their roads. Look at their cities. They are sparkling clean because they actually spend their money on real infrastructure. We're going to spend trillions of dollars, and we're going to have no idea where it went. In fact, the politicians voting for this really have no idea where it went, other than they are confident that it's going to be going to Democratic and leftist constituencies to keep them happy. But we're not going to see, we're not going to actually experience the good aspects of a so-called infrastructure bill in any real way. Guarantee you, because it's going to take too long to do, and we're just not. It's going to take 5 years for the environmental studies to get done in this country.
And the 1.2 trillion, the hard infrastructure bill, as they call it, only 109 billion goes to roads, bridges, airports, and things that 95% of Americans would agree is actual infrastructure.
Sure.
A lot of it's green energy. A lot of it's in quote investments that, which is really just giving money to Democratic Party aligned interest groups.
Sure. Well, to Jim's point of we used to build stuff in this country. No, Jim, today we destroy stuff. So we're in the business of destroying stuff. We should learn a lesson from the University of Wisconsin that just paid $50,000 to remove a racist boulder from their premises. So yeah. I'm pretty sure maybe like 10% of the infrastructure bill goes to removing racist rocks from different public landmarks. But
yeah, building back better, removing racist rocks in Wisconsin and putting electric vehicle charging stations in rural Michigan. That's build back better, baby.
All right, we are out of time here. We are going to say goodbye to this episode of the Think Podcast. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. Our audio version comes out on Friday. If you're listening to that, make sure to check out our live version that's on Thursday at noon Central Time. You can catch us on YouTube and Facebook, and you can put a comment in there, and maybe we'll reply to it, throw it up on the screen. We'll see what happens. If you want to send us your comments or suggestions to the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. That's the best way to contact us. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
And Chris Talgo, you are a ghost when it comes to social media, so just join me in saying goodbye to the fine people.
Goodbye, and I really want to pray for Americans who are caught behind enemy lines in Afghanistan.
Good final statement. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.